Hello, and welcome back to Code Your English, the channel where you improve your English while discovering powerful ideas that can transform the way you think, work, and live. I'm truly excited to have you here. So let me ask you a question. When did being yourself become something you had to justify? Think about that question for a moment, because it is not as simple as it sounds. There was probably a time in your life when you never questioned who you were. You liked what you liked, you said what you thought, and you did not feel the need to explain your personality to anyone. But somewhere between childhood and adulthood, something shifted. You started noticing other people's lives more closely. And slowly, without really deciding to, you began measuring your own life against theirs. We see someone else's career, and suddenly we start questioning our own path, wondering whether we chose correctly or whether we are simply falling behind. We meet someone with effortless confidence, and all at once our own personality starts to feel too quiet, too awkward, or not quite good enough. We scroll through someone else's lifestyle, their vacations, their achievements, their seemingly perfect routines, and our own ordinary life starts to feel a little bit inadequate in comparison, even though nothing about our life has actually changed. So here is an uncomfortable question worth sitting with. Are we actually unhappy with our lives? Or have we simply learned to compare them with someone else's? It is worth repeating, because the answer changes everything. A life can be genuinely good and still feel disappointing the moment we place it next to a life that looks better on the surface. The problem is rarely the life itself. The problem is the comparison. This brings us to the central idea of today's episode, and it is one that will guide everything we explore together. Staying unique does not mean refusing to change. It does not mean stubbornly holding on to old habits or rejecting every piece of advice that comes your way. Staying unique means growing without losing yourself in the process. It means becoming a better version of who you already are, rather than trying to become a copy of someone else entirely. Before we go any further, I want you to pause and ask yourself something honest. Have you ever looked at someone else's life and suddenly felt that your own wasn't good enough? Maybe it happened while you were scrolling through your phone late at night. Maybe it happened during a conversation with an old classmate who seemed to be doing so much better than you. Whatever the situation was, hold that feeling in your mind, because we are going to come back to it throughout this episode. But before we can protect our individuality, we first need to understand why we are so eager to give it away in the first place. Why we compare ourselves to others. Comparison does not always begin with jealousy. Sometimes it begins with insecurity, and that distinction matters more than you might think. Jealousy assumes that you want exactly what someone else has. Insecurity, on the other hand, simply means that you are not entirely sure whether what you have is enough. And once that seed of doubt is planted, it becomes remarkably easy for comparison to grow out of control. Comparing ourselves to others is, in many ways, a completely natural human tendency. For thousands of years, human beings have lived in groups, and being aware of how we measure up against the people around us has always played a role in survival, in belonging, and in social status. In that sense, comparison is not some modern invention. It is something deeply embedded in human psychology. What has changed dramatically, however, is the scale of it. Modern technology has intensified this tendency in ways that previous generations never had to face. In the past, you might have compared yourself to a handful of neighbors, classmates, or co-workers. Today, thanks to social media, you are constantly exposed to thousands of curated lives, each one carefully selected to appear as impressive as possible. Social media gives us access to carefully chosen highlights, not to the full reality behind them. We see someone's vacation photos, not the argument they had with their partner the night before. We see someone's promotion announcement, not the years of frustration and failure that came before it. And so we end up comparing our full, complicated, ordinary reality with someone else's polished highlight reel, which is an unfair comparison from the very beginning. This kind of comparison shows up in almost every area of life. People compare their career progress and their income to what their peers seem to be earning. They compare their appearance to filtered photos and unrealistic beauty standards. They compare their relationships, wondering whether their partner is affectionate enough or their friendships are close enough. They compare their confidence, assuming that everyone else feels more comfortable in social situations than they do. They compare their education, their lifestyle, and even the way they spend their weekends. And for many of you listening right now, there is one particular type of comparison that feels especially personal. Comparing your English-speaking ability and fluency to someone else's. Perhaps you have had a moment where you heard someone speaking English smoothly, without hesitation, and a small voice inside your head whispered, "I'll never sound like that." That feeling is incredibly common among language learners, and it is worth examining honestly because it reveals something important about how comparison actually works. Comparison can sometimes provide genuine inspiration. Watching someone achieve something impressive can remind you of what is possible and motivate you to keep working toward your own goals. But there is a crucial difference between comparison that motivates and comparison that damages. When comparison becomes constant, when it becomes a habit rather than an occasional moment of inspiration, it creates self-doubt, frustration, and an unrealistic standard of success that no one, not even the people you are comparing yourself to, could ever consistently meet. So take a moment to reflect honestly. Who do you compare yourself with most often? And how does that comparison actually make you feel? Does it push you forward with energy and determination, or does it quietly drain your confidence every single time? But comparison isn't the only force shaping how we see ourselves. Sometimes, the strongest pressure doesn't come from strangers on a screen at all. Sometimes, it comes from the people who are closest to us. The expectations of family, society, and culture. Sometimes the life you are living isn't the life you chose. That sentence might feel uncomfortable, but for many people it is simply true. From a very young age, we are surrounded by expectations, some spoken directly, and others communicated through subtle hints, disappointed expressions, or unspoken family traditions. Think about the typical path that many families and societies encourage. Get a good, stable job. Earn enough money to be considered successful. Get married by a certain age, ideally before your relatives start asking uncomfortable questions at every family gathering. Buy a house, because renting is sometimes seen as a temporary or incomplete way of living. Choose a career that sounds respectable when introduced to distant relatives. Behave in a socially acceptable way, avoiding anything that might raise eyebrows or spark gossip. Follow whatever your particular culture considers to be the definition of a successful life. It is worth acknowledging that this pressure looks different depending on where you come from. Different cultures have different ideas about success, respect, adulthood, and responsibility. In some cultures, independence is celebrated from a young age, while in others, staying close to family and prioritizing their opinions is considered a sign of respect and good character. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but both can create pressure when a person's authentic desires do not match what their culture or family expects from them. Here is a powerful distinction that is worth remembering long after this episode ends. Respecting your family doesn't mean abandoning your individuality. These two things are not automatically in conflict, even though it can sometimes feel that way. You can love your parents deeply, value their opinions, and still recognize that certain decisions in your life belong to you alone. There is a real tension here worth acknowledging honestly. Being grateful for someone's advice is not the same as being obligated to follow it completely, especially when you are the person who ultimately has to live with the consequences of that choice, not them. Let me share a scenario that plays out in countless variations around the world. Someone chooses a career, not because they feel any genuine passion for it, but because their parents consider it prestigious and respectable. Perhaps it was medicine, engineering, law, or some other traditionally admired profession. For years, this person works hard, achieves good results, and appears successful from the outside. But quietly, sometimes not until many years later, they come to a painful realization. They never genuinely wanted that life. They wanted to make their parents proud. And somewhere along the way, that goal became indistinguishable from their own personal ambition. This is not a story meant to suggest that following your family's advice is always wrong, or that every traditional career path is a mistake. It is simply a reminder that the difference between honoring your family and losing yourself to their expectations can be dangerously thin if you never stop to examine it. Ask yourself honestly, are there any decisions in your life that you made mainly because you were afraid of disappointing someone else? Not because you didn't care about the outcome, but because the fear of someone else's disappointment felt heavier than your own desires. And even when nobody is actively telling us what to do, even when we are completely alone with our own thoughts, there is another voice that can be surprisingly powerful, one that often speaks the loudest of all, the voice inside our own heads. Self-doubt, perfectionism, and the fear of being different. What if the thing that makes you different is exactly what makes you valuable? Sit with that question for a moment, because most of us spend an enormous amount of energy trying to hide the very qualities that could actually set us apart in a meaningful way. Self-doubt has a sneaky way of making us hide the parts of ourselves that matter most. We hide our opinions during conversations, afraid that disagreeing with someone might create conflict or make us look uninformed. We hide our creativity, keeping our ideas, our art, or our writing tucked away in private notebooks because we worry it isn't good enough to share. We hide our personality, softening our natural way of speaking or behaving so that we blend in more easily with whoever is around us. We hide our ambitions, telling ourselves that dreaming too big might set us up for embarrassing failure. We hide our accent, our unusual interests, and sometimes even our sense of humor, all in the name of avoiding judgment. Perfectionism plays a fascinating role in all of this. On the surface, perfectionism looks like high standards and dedication, but underneath, it often functions as a form of protection. If you never actually try, you can never technically fail. If you never share your real opinion, no one can criticize it. If you never start that project you've been dreaming about, it can remain perfect and untouched in your imagination forever, safe from any comparison with reality. Sometimes we don't say what we really think because we're afraid of sounding foolish in front of others. We don't start a meaningful project because there is a real possibility that it might fail, and failure feels far more dangerous than simply staying where we are. And for many English learners specifically, this pattern shows up in a very particular way. We don't speak English out loud because we might make mistakes. and making mistakes in front of others can feel deeply uncomfortable. Here is an important idea worth remembering. Trying to look perfect can actually prevent you from becoming authentic. Perfection and authenticity often pull in completely opposite directions. The moment you prioritize looking flawless, you naturally start hiding anything that seems messy, unfinished, or imperfect, which usually means hiding the most honest and real parts of yourself. Picture an English learner sitting quietly in a classroom or a conversation group, full of thoughts and ideas they genuinely want to express, but remaining silent because they are worried about making grammatical mistakes in front of other people. That silence might feel safe in the moment, but it comes at a real cost. Every unspoken sentence is a missed opportunity for growth, for connection, and for practice. Let's connect this directly to your own life, wherever you are on your language learning journey. Being imperfect in public is often the price of becoming confident. There is simply no way around this truth. Confidence is not something you develop by waiting until you feel ready. It is something you build gradually, through the uncomfortable experience of speaking despite your fear, writing despite your uncertainty, and trying despite the very real possibility that you might get something wrong. So ask yourself honestly, have you ever been so afraid of doing something wrong that you didn't even try? What did that fear actually protect you from, and what did it end up costing you instead? If we stop trying so hard to impress everyone around us, something interesting happens. We finally create enough mental space to ask a far more important question. What do I actually value? Discover what makes you, you. You don't find yourself in one dramatic moment. You build yourself through small choices. This idea deserves particular attention, because many people wait for some kind of grand revelation, some life-changing event that will suddenly reveal exactly who they are meant to be. In reality, identity is built gradually, through hundreds of ordinary decisions made over the course of years. Let's explore individuality through everyday choices rather than through dramatic personality labels, because true self-understanding usually comes from paying attention to the small patterns in your daily life, rather than from taking a quick online quiz. Ask yourself these questions honestly, and give yourself time to actually think about the answers rather than rushing past them. What genuinely interests me? Separate from what I think should interest me? What kind of conversations do I actually enjoy? And which ones leave me feeling drained or bored? What do I believe in when no one is around to judge my beliefs? What kind of work gives me real energy rather than simply paying the bills? What makes me lose track of time completely, absorbed so deeply that I forget to check my phone? What kind of person do I genuinely want to become? Not to impress anyone, but simply because that version of myself feels right? And perhaps most revealing of all, what would I do if nobody were watching? There is a meaningful difference worth discussing here between identity and image, and understanding this difference can change the way you see yourself entirely. Your image is what you want people to think about you. It is the version of yourself that you present carefully, the highlight reel, the curated presentation designed for an audience. Your identity, on the other hand, is who you are when nobody is watching. It is your habits when no one is checking, your thoughts when no one is listening, and your choices when there is no possibility of praise or criticism from anyone else. I want to encourage you to start noticing your own patterns, preferences, strengths, weaknesses, values, and curiosities, almost like a scientist studying an interesting subject. What do you naturally gravitate toward? What topics do you find yourself researching for fun, late at night, simply because you're curious? What kind of person do people describe you as when they talk about you to others? These small observations, collected over time, tell you far more about your genuine identity than any single dramatic moment ever could. So here is a reflection worth sitting with for a moment. If you removed other people's opinions from the equation entirely, what would you choose for yourself? But discovering yourself doesn't mean staying exactly the same forever. In fact, true individuality requires something else entirely, something that many people overlook: the courage to evolve. Stay unique without refusing to grow. Being yourself doesn't mean staying the same forever. This is one of the most important distinctions in this entire episode, because so many people misunderstand the idea of authenticity. They assume that being true to themselves means resisting all change, holding on to old habits, old beliefs, and old ways of doing things simply because that is who they have always been. But authenticity and personal growth are not opposites. In fact, they can and should work together beautifully. You can change your habits, replacing ones that no longer serve you with ones that support the life you actually want to live. You can improve your communication, learning to express your thoughts more clearly and confidently. You can become more disciplined, developing the kind of consistency that turns dreams into reality. You can learn another language, opening doors to new opportunities and new ways of connecting with people around the world. You can develop new skills, expanding what you are capable of. You can change your career entirely if the one you are currently in no longer aligns with who you are becoming. You can become more confident, gradually replacing hesitation with self-assurance. You can overcome weaknesses that have held you back for years. And through all of this transformation, you can still remain fundamentally yourself. Here is a distinction worth remembering clearly, because it will help you tell the difference between healthy growth and harmful comparison in your own life. Growth says, I want to become better. Comparison says, I need to become someone else. Notice how different these two statements actually are, even though they might look similar on the surface. Growth is rooted in your own standards and your own vision for your life. Comparison is rooted in someone else's life, someone else's achievements, and someone else's definition of success. This brings us to the idea of intentional growth, which means taking inspiration from others without copying their entire identity. You are allowed to admire specific qualities in other people without wanting to become an exact replica of who they are. For example, you can admire someone's confidence without needing to become loud or overly assertive yourself, if that isn't naturally who you are. You can admire someone's discipline without adopting their entire lifestyle, their daily schedule, or their specific habits, if those particular habits don't actually fit your own circumstances or personality. So take a moment to reflect. What is one quality you genuinely admire in another person that you could develop in your own way, using your own personality as the foundation rather than trying to imitate theirs completely? And once you truly understand this distinction, something powerful becomes possible. You can stop copying people entirely and start learning from them instead, which is a far more sustainable and authentic way to grow. Stay unique without refusing to grow. Being yourself doesn't mean staying the same forever. This is one of the most important distinctions in this entire episode, because so many people misunderstand the idea of authenticity. They assume that being true to themselves means resisting all change, holding on to old habits, old beliefs, and old ways of doing things simply because that is who they have always been. But authenticity and personal growth are not opposites. In fact, they can and should work together beautifully. You can change your habits, replacing ones that no longer serve you with ones that support the life you actually want to live. You can improve your communication, learning to express your thoughts more clearly and confidently. You can become more disciplined, developing the kind of consistency that turns dreams into reality. You can learn another language, opening doors to new opportunities and new ways of connecting with people around the world. You can develop new skills, expanding what you are capable of. You can change your career entirely if the one you are currently in no longer aligns with who you are becoming. You can become more confident, gradually replacing hesitation with self-assurance. You can overcome weaknesses that have held you back for years. And through all of this transformation, you can still remain fundamentally yourself. Here is a distinction worth remembering clearly, because it will help you tell the difference between healthy growth and harmful comparison in your own life. Growth says, I want to become better. Comparison says, I need to become someone else. Notice how different these two statements actually are, even though they might look similar on the surface. Growth is rooted in your own standards and your own vision for your life. Comparison is rooted in someone else's life, someone else's achievements, and someone else's definition of success. This brings us to the idea of intentional growth, which means taking inspiration from others without copying their entire identity. You are allowed to admire specific qualities in other people without wanting to become an exact replica of who they are. For example, you can admire someone's confidence without needing to become loud or overly assertive yourself, if that isn't naturally who you are. You can admire someone's discipline without adopting their entire lifestyle, their daily schedule, or their specific habits, if those particular habits don't actually fit your own circumstances or personality. So take a moment to reflect. What is one quality you genuinely admire in another person that you could develop in your own way, using your own personality as the foundation rather than trying to imitate theirs completely? And once you truly understand this distinction, something powerful becomes possible. You can stop copying people entirely and start learning from them instead, which is a far more sustainable and authentic way to grow. Learn from others without losing yourself. Inspiration is useful. Imitation can become a trap. These two ideas might sound similar at first, but they lead people down completely different paths. Inspiration expands who you already are. Imitation, taken too far, slowly erases who you already are, replacing your authentic voice with a poor copy of someone else's. Let's introduce a healthier approach to learning from the people you admire. Instead of asking, "Why can't I be like them?" try asking a completely different question. What can I learn from them? This small shift in language creates an enormous shift in mindset. The first question positions you as inadequate, constantly falling short of someone else's standard. The second question positions you as a student, actively gathering useful knowledge that you can apply in your own unique way. Think about the mentors, authors, teachers, successful people, friends, and even the people you encounter online who have influenced your thinking. These people can offer genuine value to your life, but only if you approach them correctly. The key lies in a simple but powerful idea. You can borrow principles, not personalities. Let me give you some concrete examples of what this actually looks like in practice. You can learn someone's discipline, the specific way they show up consistently for their goals, but you should build your own routine around your own life, your own schedule, and your own energy levels, rather than copying theirs exactly. You can learn someone's communication skills, the way they explain complicated ideas clearly or connect with an audience, but you should keep your own voice, your own tone, and your own personality intact throughout. You can learn someone's business strategy, the underlying logic behind their success, but you need to adapt it to your own circumstances, your own resources, and your own market, rather than assuming an identical approach will produce identical results for you. You can even learn from someone's setback, understanding what went wrong and why, without assuming that their entire path, including its failures, must somehow become your path too. Consider a realistic scenario that many people experience at some point in their lives. Someone admires a successful person deeply and decides to imitate them almost completely, adopting their daily schedule, their communication style, even their specific opinions and preferences. For a while, this might feel exciting, like following a proven formula for success, but eventually, something starts to feel wrong. The strategy that worked so beautifully for the other person simply doesn't fit this person's personality or their actual circumstances. Motivation fades, frustration builds, and eventually they realize that borrowing someone else's entire identity was never going to lead to genuine, lasting success, because success built on imitation rarely feels satisfying, even when it technically works. So ask yourself, who inspires you? And what can you actually learn from them without trying to become them entirely? Of course, choosing your own path instead of simply following someone else's is not always easy. Sometimes it means walking in a direction that other people around you don't fully understand, and that requires a particular kind of courage. Have the courage to walk your own path. Not everyone will understand your choices, and that's okay. This might be one of the hardest lessons to truly accept, because as social creatures, we naturally crave understanding and approval from the people around us. But the truth is, some of the most important decisions you will ever make in your life will confuse, worry, or even disappoint people who genuinely care about you, simply because your path is different from what they expected or would have chosen for themselves. Let's explore the loneliness and uncertainty that can come with being different. Because pretending this discomfort doesn't exist would be dishonest. Sometimes staying true to yourself means saying no to opportunities or expectations that don't align with who you are, even when saying yes would be easier and would please more people. Sometimes it means changing direction entirely, walking away from a path you have already invested significant time and energy into, because you have realized it isn't right for you. Sometimes it means starting over, beginning again from a place that might look, from the outside, like failure, even though internally it feels like courage. Sometimes it means disappointing someone you care about deeply, not because you don't value their opinion, but because their vision for your life and your own vision have finally, unavoidably diverged. Sometimes it means taking longer than others to reach your goals, watching people around you move faster while you continue at your own necessary pace. Sometimes it means choosing a less traditional path, one that doesn't fit neatly into familiar categories that others can easily understand or explain to their own families. Sometimes it means accepting setbacks along the way, genuine failures that test your resolve and force you to decide whether you truly believe in your own direction. And sometimes it simply means being misunderstood, accepting that not everyone will grasp your reasoning, and being at peace with that reality anyway. There is an important difference worth discussing here between being accepted and being authentic. Being accepted means that other people approve of your choices, that your decisions fit comfortably within their expectations. Being authentic means that your choices genuinely reflect who you are, regardless of whether everyone approves. These two things sometimes overlap beautifully, but they are not the same thing, and confusing them can lead to a lifetime of decisions made for the wrong reasons. You don't need everyone's approval to know, deep down, that a decision is right for you. That said, this idea needs to be balanced carefully with genuine responsibility. Being yourself doesn't mean ignoring consequences, refusing feedback, or behaving selfishly toward the people in your life. Authenticity is not an excuse for carelessness or a shield against legitimate criticism. The goal here is self-respect, not rebellion for its own sake. There is a meaningful difference between making a difficult, thoughtful decision that happens to disappoint someone and simply doing whatever you want without any consideration for how it affects the people around you. Here is a powerful line worth remembering long after this episode ends. You don't need to prove that your path is better than someone else's. You only need to know that it is genuinely yours. This single idea can release an enormous amount of unnecessary pressure. You are not competing to prove that your choices are objectively superior. You are simply trying to live a life that feels honest and true to who you actually are. So take a moment and ask yourself, what choice would you make if you weren't afraid of being judged? So how do we actually practice all of this in everyday life? How do we protect our individuality when comparison is always waiting patiently around the corner, ready to creep back in the moment we let our guard down? Build a life that feels like yours. Your life doesn't have to look impressive to everyone else. It has to feel meaningful to you. This is perhaps the most important sentence in today's entire episode. So let's take a moment to bring everything we've discussed together into something practical that you can genuinely apply, starting today. Let's walk through a simple framework for staying unique, something you can return to whenever comparison starts creeping back into your thoughts, because it inevitably will, from time to time, for all of us. The first step is to know your values. This means taking real time to understand what actually matters to you. Beneath all the noise of other people's opinions and expectations, your values are the compass that should guide your major life decisions, and without a clear sense of them, you will keep borrowing other people's compasses instead, which will only lead you toward other people's destinations. The second step is to question comparison whenever you notice it happening. This means developing the habit of noticing when you're measuring your life against someone else's, and gently pausing to ask whether that comparison is actually fair or useful. Most of the time, you will discover that you are comparing your full, complicated reality to someone else's carefully edited highlights, which was never a fair comparison to begin with. The third step is to accept imperfection as part of the process rather than an obstacle to it. This means learning to stop waiting until you're confident enough to be yourself, because that particular kind of confidence usually only arrives after you have already taken action, not before. Waiting for perfect confidence before speaking, trying, or sharing your true self is a strategy that guarantees you will wait forever. The fourth step is to choose growth intentionally on your own terms. This means deciding to improve yourself because you genuinely want to grow, not because you secretly hate who you currently are. There is a world of difference between growth motivated by self-respect and growth motivated by self-rejection, even when the actions themselves look identical from the outside. The fifth step is to learn without copying. This means actively taking lessons, principles, and inspiration from others, while consistently keeping your own voice, your own personality, and your own perspective intact throughout the process. The sixth step is to protect your individuality with real intention. This means refusing to allow every single opinion, trend, or external expectation to quietly rewrite your identity over time. Protecting yourself in this way requires ongoing awareness, because these outside influences rarely announce themselves loudly. They tend to creep in slowly, one small compromise at a time. And the seventh step is to be patient with your own journey. This means genuinely accepting that your timeline doesn't have to match anyone else's timeline, no matter how much pressure you might feel to keep pace with people around you. Some of the most meaningful achievements in life take far longer to develop than social media or casual comparison would ever lead you to believe. Before we close today's episode, I want to leave you with a series of quiet reflection questions. Don't rush through them. Take a moment, perhaps later today, to actually sit with each one honestly. What part of yourself have you been hiding, whether from others or even from yourself? Whose approval are you still chasing, even though deep down you suspect it might never fully satisfy you? What makes you different, and have you been treating that difference as a weakness or as a genuine strength? What would your life look like if you stopped trying to impress everyone around you? And finally, what is one small decision you can make today that feels a little bit more like the real you? Let's close with the central message of everything we've explored together in this episode. You don't need to become more like everyone else to become successful. Success built on imitation rarely brings the satisfaction you are hoping for, because it was never truly yours to begin with. You don't need to erase your differences to belong somewhere meaningful. The people and communities worth belonging to are the ones that make space for who you genuinely are, not the ones that require you to disappear into sameness. And you don't need to have everything figured out to start becoming the person you want to be. Clarity often arrives through action, not before it. Your job isn't to copy someone else's life, no matter how impressive or enviable it might appear from the outside. Your job is to build a life that is genuinely yours, imperfect, evolving, occasionally uncertain, but authentically your own. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If any part of this episode made you pause and reflect, even for a moment, then it has already done exactly what it was meant to do. Keep practicing your English. Keep practicing being honestly, unapologetically yourself. And I'll see you in the next episode.